Marisol sat by the nursery window, gazing out at the quiet street as the late afternoon sunlight spilled through the lace curtains. The bassinet stood ready, filled with soft blankets, and the smell of freshly laundered baby clothes lingered in the air. She rested her hands on her swollen belly, feeling the gentle rhythmic kicks of the twins she had carried for nearly 9 months. It was a moment she had imagined countless times. Her husband, Damien, walking through the door with flowers and a kiss, telling her he couldn't wait to meet their children. But Damien was late. Marisol checked her phone for the 5th time in as many minutes. Her messages had gone unanswered all day. A strange unease gnawed at the edges of her joy, a whisper of doubt that she tried to silence. He's probably tied up at work, she thought. Damien had always been busy, his career demanding long hours and endless meetings. But he had promised he'd be there for this. He had to be. The first sharp pang in her abdomen made her gasp. It wasn't the false alarm she'd experienced weeks ago. This was deeper, stronger, more insistent. Marisol gripped the armrest of the chair, trying to steady her breathing. Stay calm, she told herself. Everything will be fine. Damien will be here soon. When her phone buzzed, relief flooded her chest. She fumbled to answer, her fingers trembling. "Damien?" she asked, her voice tight with pain and hope. There was a pause, and then his voice came, steady and distant. "Marisol, I need to tell you something." Her heart dropped. "Where are you?" "The contractions have started. I need you to come home." "I can't," he said, and the coldness in his tone sent a chill down her spine. "I'm not coming home. I'm with Clara." The name hit her like a blow. Claire. The woman she dismissed as nothing more than a passing acquaintance, a former colleague of Damien's. Marisol had seen her at a company event months ago, laughing too loudly at Damien's jokes and brushing her hand against his arm. She had questioned him then, and he had waved it off, calling her paranoid. What do you mean?" Marisol whispered, her voice cracking. "You're with her now? Why?" Damien hesitated, but the weight of his betrayal came through clearly. "I didn't want to tell you this way, but I can't live a lie anymore. Clara and we're in love." "I'm sorry, Marisol." The phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. The room seemed to spin, the nursery's pastel walls mocking her pain. A surge of emotion, anger, heartbreak, fear, crashed over her as another contraction tore through her body. "Damien, I'm about to have your children," she screamed, clutching her stomach and picking the phone back up. "How can you do this now?" "I've made my decision," he replied, his voice devoid of the love and warmth she once knew. "I'll support the kids financially, but I can't be there for you. This is what's best for everyone." The line went dead. Marisol sank to the floor, sobbing as the pain of labor mixed with the agony of betrayal. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with had abandoned her in her darkest hour. But there was no time to wallow. Another contraction racked her body, sharper and more urgent than the last. Marisol gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus. "The babies need me," she thought. "I have to do this, for them." Crawling to her phone, she dialed her mother, Ines, her lifeline in moments like this. The call was answered on the first ring. "Mija, what's wrong?" Ines's voice was laced with worry. "Mom," Marisol choked out between gasps. "It's time. The babies are coming." Ines didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." "Stay calm, Marisol. You're not alone." Within minutes, Ines arrived, her weathered face etched with determination. She wrapped Marisol in a blanket and helped her into the car, whispering words of comfort. "You're strong, Mija. You've got this." At the hospital, the fluorescent lights and clinical smell were a stark contrast to the warmth Marisol had imagined for this moment. Nurses rushed her to a delivery room, and the flurry of activity around her blurred into a haze. Her mind, however, couldn't escape Damien's words. "Clara and we're in love." The phrase echoed like a cruel mantra, threatening to shatter her resolve. But as another contraction came, the reality of the moment snapped her back. Her children needed her strength, and she wouldn't let them down. Hours passed in a grueling, agonizing blur. Ines never left her side, holding her hand and whispering prayers as Marisol fought through the pain. The world outside the delivery room faded away. There was no Damien, no Clara, no betrayal. Only her and the tiny lives fighting to enter the world. Finally, a cry pierced the air, followed by another. Tears streamed down Marisol's face as the nurse placed her newborn twins in her arms. A boy and a girl, perfect, fragile, and beautiful. In that moment, the weight of Damien's absence felt less suffocating. She wasn't alone. She had her children, her mother, and the faint but growing spark of her own strength. She would survive this. She had to. The sterile hum of the hospital surrounded Marisol as she clung to the edges of consciousness. The pain in her abdomen grew sharper, more insistent, pulling her into the harsh reality she couldn't escape. She gripped her mother's hand like a lifeline, her knuckles white with strain. "Breathe, Mija," Ines whispered, her voice steady despite the fear etched into her face. "You're strong. You've got this." Marisol nodded weakly, her breaths shallow and erratic. The betrayal still throbbed in her chest, mingling with the physical agony. "Damien is gone. He won't be here for them, for me." A nurse rushed into the room, her professional calm a stark contrast to the chaos swirling inside Marisol's mind. "We're prepping the ore. The doctor is on her way," she announced, adjusting the four attached to Marisol's arm. "Or," Marisol croaked. Panic edged her voice. "What's wrong?" The nurse met her gaze, her expression carefully neutral. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high and the babies are in distress. We need to move quickly." Her words hit like a punch. Marisol's world tilted, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Her mother tightened her grip on her hand, her calm presence anchoring Marisol against the tide of fear. "I'll be here," Ines said, her voice firm. "No matter what." Marisol was wheeled into the brightly lit operating room, her body trembling. The fluorescent lights above blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to be strong, for her babies, for her future, but the enormity of the moment pressed down on her like a crushing weight. As the medical team worked around her, she closed her eyes, retreating inward. Memories of Damien surfaced, unbidden and cruel. His warm smile when they first met, his promises of a life filled with love and security, his betrayal. How could he leave now? How could he choose Clara over us? But another thought flickered in her mind, a defiant spark. "I can do this. He doesn't define me. My children will have me and that will be enough." The doctor's voice interrupted her thoughts. "We're ready to begin. Stay calm, Marisol. We're going to take care of you." Time seemed to bend in the operating room. Every second felt like an eternity as Marisol fought to stay conscious. She focused on the rhythm of her breathing, on the warmth of her mother's prayers that echoed faintly in her mind. The pain was overwhelming, but beneath it was a fierce determination she hadn't known she possessed. Finally, after what felt like hours, a piercing cry shattered the tension in the room. Marisol's heart surged. "The first baby is out," the doctor announced. "A girl?" Through her haze of exhaustion and fear, Marisol caught a glimpse of her daughter, a tiny wriggling bundle with a shock of dark hair. Tears streamed down her face. "My baby." Moments later, another cry followed. "And here's the boy," the doctor said, lifting the second twin into view. "They're both strong." Relief washed over Marisol like a wave. She had done it. Despite everything, Damien's betrayal, the complications, the fear, her babies were here, alive and well. The nurses worked quickly to clean and swaddle the twins, bringing them closer to Marisol. "You're incredible," one nurse whispered as she placed the twins against Marisol's chest. The warmth of their tiny bodies against her skin filled her with a fierce, protective love. For the first time in weeks, the aching void in her heart felt less consuming. But the moment of peace was short-lived. The doctor's voice grew tense. "Her blood pressure is still rising. We need to stabilize her." The room blurred again as Marisol's body betrayed her, the strain of the delivery taking its toll. She clutched her babies tighter, refusing to let go. "Please," she whispered, her voice faint. "Take care of them." The nurse carefully lifted the twins from her arms, her voice gentle. "We'll keep them safe. You need to rest." Darkness closed in, but Marisol fought it, clinging to the image of her babies' faces. "I can't leave them. I won't." Hours later, Marisol woke in a dim recovery room, her body weak but alive. The steady beep of the heart monitor was a welcome reminder that she had survived. Beside her, Ines sat in a chair holding the twins, one in each arm. "They're perfect," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Just like you, Mija." Marisol reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched her daughter's tiny hand. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I thought I wouldn't make it." "But you did," Ines said, her gaze steady. "You're stronger than you know." The weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the near-death experience, pressed on Marisol, but so did the overwhelming love she felt for her children. Damien's absence, though painful, no longer felt like the end of her world. She had something greater now, something worth fighting for. A nurse entered, smiling warmly as she checked Marisol's vitals. "You gave us quite the scare, but you're going to be okay. And your babies are healthy. You should be proud." "I am," Marisol said softly, her voice filled with resolve. "I am?" As the twins stirred in Inés's arms, Marisol felt a deep sense of purpose take root within her. Damien had abandoned them, but she wouldn't. Her children would grow up knowing love, strength, and resilience. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same determination that had carried her through the darkness. She was Marisol, a mother, a survivor, and a woman reclaiming her life. And this was just the beginning. Damien sat in the dimly lit corner of an upscale restaurant, swirling his glass of wine as Clara laughed across from him. Her perfect smile and effortless charm were everything he had convinced himself he deserved after years of routine and responsibility. But as her laughter faded into the background noise, his mind drifted to Marisol, lying in a hospital bed, cradling the children he hadn't met. He hated the weight that settled on his chest whenever he thought of her. "You made your choice," he told himself, though the words felt hollow. Clara reached across the table, touching his hand lightly. "You're distracted," she said, tilting her head. "Thinking about them?" "I'm not distracted," Damien replied, his tone sharper than intended. He downed the rest of his wine, signaling for the check. "Let's just get out of here." Clara raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Damien had always been skilled at avoiding confrontation, at justifying his choices with slick reasoning and shallow logic. "Marisol will be fine," he told himself as they left the restaurant. "She has her family. She doesn't need me." At the hospital, Marisol leaned against the pillows of her bed, exhaustion written across her face. Inés held one of the twins, her weathered hands cradling the infant with practiced care. Mateo, Marisol's childhood friend, sat at the edge of the room, his usually bright expression clouded with worry. "You look like you've been through a war," Mateo said, attempting a smile. His deep brown eyes met Marisol's, and for a moment she felt a flicker of warmth. "I feel like it too," Marisol admitted, her voice hoarse. "But they're worth it." Mateo stood and approached the bassinet, where the other twin lay sleeping. "They're beautiful, Marisol. You did good." Marisol's lips curved into a faint smile. "Thanks to Mama. I don't know what I'd do without her." Inés looked up, her eyes filled with pride and a hint of worry. "You don't have to do this alone, Mija. You have us." The room fell quiet, the weight of Damien's absence hanging in the air. Mateo cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Has he called? Checked in?" "No," Marisol said, her voice tight. "And I don't expect him to." Mateo's jaw clenched, but he didn't press further. Instead, he sat back in his chair, his presence a steadying force. Later that evening, as Inés rocked the twins to sleep, Marisol finally allowed herself to speak the words she had been holding in. "Mama, why did Damien change? How could he do this to us?" Inés sighed, placing the sleeping infant in the bassinet. "People like Damien. Sometimes they don't know how to appreciate what they have. But you can't let his choices define you, Marisol. You're stronger than that." Marisol nodded, though the hurt lingered. "Did Papa ever?" She stopped herself, the words catching in her throat. Inés stiffened, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. "Your father, he made mistakes too. But that's the past, Mija. Focus on your children. They're your future." Marisol frowned, sensing the tension in her mother's voice. There was more to the story, but Inés's tone made it clear she wouldn't say more. Meanwhile, Damien paced the luxurious apartment he now shared with Clara. The guilt gnawed at him, no matter how many times he told himself he deserved to move on. Clara watched him from the couch, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to feel guilty forever, you know," Clara said, her voice smooth and low. "She'll adjust. Women like Marisol always do." Damien stopped, turning to face her. "You don't know her," he snapped, surprising even himself. "She's stronger than you think." Clara's smile faltered for a moment before she leaned back, crossing her legs. "You're right. I don't know her. But I know you, Damien. You made a choice. Stop looking back." Her words grated on him, but he said nothing. Instead, he sank into a chair, the weight of his actions pressing down harder than before. "Am I the villain here?" He wondered, but he quickly pushed the thought away. It was easier to believe he wasn't. At home, Marisol tried to settle into a new rhythm. The twins demanded her attention, their cries and coos filling the small apartment. Mateo became a constant presence, helping with everything from grocery runs to late-night feedings. One afternoon, as they sorted through baby clothes, Mateo hesitated before speaking. "Marisol, I've known you my whole life. I can see when something's bothering you." Marisol sighed, folding a tiny onesie. "It's not just Damien. It's everything. Papa's death, the way Mama avoids talking about him. There's so much I don't know, and now with Damien gone, it feels like I'm missing pieces of my own life." Mateo reached for her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. Maybe it's time to ask those questions. You deserve answers, Marisol. She nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. The questions she had buried for years were beginning to resurface, and she knew she couldn't ignore them much longer. Across town, Damien sat in his car outside the hospital, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He had told himself he was just passing by, but he couldn't shake the image of Marisol's face as he walked away. She doesn't need you, he thought. You'd only make things worse. But deep down he wasn't sure that was true. As the twins' cries echoed in his memory, a sound he hadn't even heard in person, Damien felt something he couldn't name. Regret, perhaps. Or maybe just the growing realization that the life he thought he wanted was slipping out of reach. With a heavy sigh, he started the car and drove away, leaving the hospital and his family behind once again. The twins were finally asleep, their soft breaths filling the room with a soothing rhythm. Marisol sat at the small kitchen table, a mug of lukewarm tea in her hands. The apartment was quiet, but her mind was anything but. Ever since Mateo had encouraged her to ask the hard questions, she had felt a restless energy bubbling beneath the surface, demanding answers. It started with a stack of unopened mail that Ines had brought over from the house Marisol used to share with Damien. Most of it was unremarkable, bills, advertisements, and old magazines, but a thick envelope with Damien's name caught her attention. The return address was from a law firm she didn't recognize. Marisol hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the envelope. This isn't mine to open, she thought, but the memory of Damien's betrayal and abandonment pushed her forward. He gave up the right to my respect when he walked out on us. She tore the envelope open and unfolded a series of dense legal documents. Her eyes scanned the pages, her heart sinking with each line. The documents detailed a series of failed investments Damien had made over the past year, draining their joint accounts and leaving them in significant debt. Worse still, there were mentions of Clara. Her name appeared as a consultant in one of the failed ventures. Marisol's grip tightened on the papers. The betrayal cut deeper than she had imagined. Not only had Damien left her, but he had also risked their family's financial stability to pursue his selfish desires. She heard a knock at the door, jolting her from her thoughts. Mateo stood on the other side, holding a bag of groceries and wearing his usual easygoing smile. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said as he set the bag on the counter. "What's going on?" Marisol handed him the papers without a word. As Mateo read, his brow furrowed in anger. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "He's not just a coward, he's reckless." "I don't even know where to start," Marisol said, her voice trembling. "How could he do this to us? To our children?" Mateo placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out. He might have made a mess, but you don't have to clean it up alone." Meanwhile, Damien was beginning to see cracks in the perfect life he had envisioned with Clara. At first, her charm and confidence had been intoxicating, a sharp contrast to what he had deemed Marisol's predictable stability. But now, her sharp edges were cutting him in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Damien, you need to stop moping," Clara said one evening, her voice laced with irritation. She was lounging on their expensive couch, scrolling through her phone. "You've been sulking for weeks. It's pathetic." "I'm not sulking," Damien replied, his jaw tight. "I'm just thinking." Clara rolled her eyes. "Thinking about what? Your ex-wife? The kids you left behind?" Her words were like a slap, but Damien didn't respond. Instead, he stared out the window, the city lights reflecting the growing unease in his chest. Clara sighed dramatically, setting her phone down. "Look, Damien, I thought you were stronger than this. You made your choice. Stop looking back." For the first time, Damien felt a flicker of anger toward her. Clara had been a willing participant in the chaos he had caused, yet she showed no remorse, no empathy. Was this the life I really wanted? He wondered. Back at the apartment, Marisol began piecing together the full extent of Damien's deceit. She combed through old financial records, phone bills, and emails he had carelessly left behind. Patterns emerged: late-night calls to Clara, suspicious withdrawals from their savings, and the unmistakable signs of manipulation. What angered Marisol most was not the loss of money but the betrayal of trust. Damien had risked their future for his own selfish pursuits, and Clara had been complicit every step of the way. Her resolve hardened. Marisol knew she couldn't rely on Damien to clean up the mess he had made. She would protect her children and build a stable life for them, even if it meant confronting the shadows of their shared past. One evening, Marisol shared her findings with Mateo and Ines. The three of them sat at the kitchen table, the documents spread out before them. "I think I know what Clara's real game is," Marisol said, pointing to the records that linked Clara to Damien's failed investments. She's been using him. Manipulating him to get access to our money? Mateo frowned. And Damien's too blind to see it? Ines, who had remained quiet until now, finally spoke. Mija, are you sure you want to dig into this? Sometimes knowing too much can bring more pain. Marisol met her mother's gaze, her expression resolute. I need to know, Mama. If I don't face this now, it will haunt me forever. Across town, Damien was starting to see the truth himself. Clara's constant demands for money, her dismissive attitude toward his guilt, it all pointed to one thing. She cared about what he could give her, not about him. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Damien sat alone in the dark, scrolling through old photos on his phone. He stopped at one of Marisol, taken during their honeymoon. Her smile was wide, her eyes bright with hope and love. He felt a pang of regret so sharp it took his breath away. What have I done? He thought. But the damage was done, and Damien wasn't sure he could ever undo it. The following morning, Marisol received a surprise email. It was from an anonymous sender, but the contents were clear. Copies of more documents implicating Damien and Clara in a string of questionable dealings. The email ended with a cryptic note. You deserve the truth. Marisol stared at the screen, her mind racing. Someone else knew about Damien's secrets, and they wanted her to uncover them. She glanced at the twins sleeping peacefully in their crib. They were her reason to keep fighting, to keep digging. Let's see how deep this goes, she murmured, opening the next file. The soft cooing of the twins filled the small apartment as Marisol carefully dressed Emilia in a tiny onesie decorated with pastel flowers. Gabriel lay beside her on the bed, clutching his blanket as he blinked up at the world. The simple, everyday routine of caring for them brought Marisol a surprising sense of peace amidst the chaos of her life. Mama, I don't know how I'm going to do this, she admitted as Ines handed her a clean diaper. Everywhere I go, people look at me like I've done something wrong. You haven't done anything wrong, Mija, Ines replied, her voice firm. People will always talk, but their words don't define you. You're doing the best you can, and that's enough. Marisol nodded, though the judgment she faced weighed heavily on her. At the grocery store, in the park, even from distant relatives, it seemed everyone had an opinion about Damien leaving, about her raising twins on her own. The whispers stung, but she refused to let them break her. Later that afternoon, Mateo arrived, balancing a box of baby supplies in one hand and a bag of takeout in the other. I figured you might need reinforcements, he said with a grin, setting everything on the kitchen counter. You're a lifesaver, Marisol said, smiling despite herself. Mateo made himself at home, expertly rocking Gabriel to sleep while Marisol took a rare moment to eat her lunch. His presence was steady, grounding. Over the past few weeks, he had become a pillar of support, not just for the practicalities of parenting but for Marisol's emotional well-being. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Mateo said as he settled Gabriel into the crib. But you don't have to do this alone. Marisol hesitated. I'm afraid to lean on people too much. What if I fall apart? Mateo placed a hand on her shoulder. Marisol, falling apart doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. And you've got people who care about you. Me, your mom. We're here. His words settled into her heart, quieting the storm of self-doubt, if only for a moment. As the weeks passed, Marisol began to find her footing. She joined a local mothers group, hesitant at first but soon finding camaraderie among other women navigating the ups and downs of parenthood. She took small steps toward building a new life, leaning on her growing support network and cherishing the milestones of her twins. One evening, as she rocked Emilia and Gabriel to sleep, Marisol felt a wave of gratitude. Despite the hardships, she had them. Their innocent laughter, their tiny hands gripping hers, they were her strength, her purpose. But the shadows of the past still lingered. One day, while sorting through old photo albums with Ines, Marisol came across a picture of her father. He stood tall, his arm around a younger Ines, his expression warm but tinged with something Marisol couldn't place. Mama, she said, holding up the photo. What was Papa like? I mean, really like? Ines hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the album. Your father was complicated, she said carefully. He loved us, but he made choices I didn't always agree with. Marisol frowned. Like what? Ines sighed, closing the album. There are things about your father's life that I've kept from you. Not to protect him, but to protect you. Mama, Marisol said, her voice steady. I need to know. I can't keep carrying all these unanswered questions. Ines nodded, her shoulders sagging under the weight of years of secrets. One day, Mija. I promise. But not yet. Marisol wanted to push, but she saw the pain in her mother's eyes and relented. One day she thought, but not today. Across town, Damien sat alone in his apartment, staring at a photo of Marisol and the twins that he had pulled from an old social media post. Clara was out, likely meeting friends or, as Damien suspected, someone else. The walls that once felt luxurious now seemed to close in on him. He thought about calling Marisol, about asking to see his children. But every time he picked up the phone, shame stopped him. What right do I have? He wondered. I chose this. But the hollow feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. Marisol, meanwhile, found herself leaning more on Mateo. He had become a constant presence, helping her navigate the challenges of motherhood and rebuilding her confidence. One evening, as they sat on the couch after putting the twins to bed, Marisol turned to him. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "For everything. I don't know how I'd be doing this without you." Mateo smiled, his gaze steady. "You'd be fine. But I'm glad I can help." For a moment, the air between them shifted, the unspoken bond they shared taking on a new weight. But before either could speak, Emilia's cry echoed from the nursery, breaking the moment. Despite the growing support around her, Marisol still wrestled with the scars Damien had left. She often found herself awake late at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she was doing enough, if she could truly give her children the life they deserved. But then she would look at them, Gabriel's peaceful face as he slept, Emilia's tiny hand curled around her finger, and the doubts would quiet. They didn't need perfection. They needed love, and that was something she had in abundance. Marisol wasn't just surviving, she was learning to thrive. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, she knew one thing for sure: she would never let Damien's choices define her or her children's future. The dim glow of Damien's phone lit up the room as he scrolled aimlessly through social media, his feed a mix of meaningless updates and staged perfection. His eyes landed on a post from an old acquaintance, a photo of the man holding his newborn daughter, his caption overflowing with love and pride. Damien felt a pang in his chest, a visceral reminder of what he had chosen to leave behind. "Damien," Clara's sharp voice cut through the silence. She was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. "Are you going to sit there all night, or are we going to talk about the board meeting tomorrow?" Damien glanced at her, the weight of her impatience pressing on him. "What's there to talk about? Everything's handled." Clara let out a humorless laugh. "You think it's handled? People are starting to talk, Damien. About us. About your decisions. You're not as untouchable as you think." Her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they hit at the growing cracks in his carefully constructed life. The whispers about his abandonment of Marisol and his children had begun to spread, along with rumors of unethical deals linked to his failing investments. His spotless reputation was unraveling, and Clara wasn't helping. "Maybe if you didn't insist on flaunting our relationship," Damien shot back, his voice edged with bitterness, "people wouldn't have so much to say." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Don't blame me for your mess. I didn't tell you to walk out on your family." The room fell silent, her words a dagger to his already fragile ego. Clara turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. Damien sank back into the couch, his head in his hands. "What am I doing?" he thought. The life he had traded everything for now felt hollow, its glittering facade crumbling under the weight of his guilt. Across town, Marisol sat at the kitchen table, going over a stack of job applications. The twins were finally asleep, and the quiet moments at night had become her time to plan for the future. The pile of bills on the counter was a constant reminder of how much she needed to secure stable income, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely overwhelmed. Ines walked into the room carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. "You've been at this all day," she said, setting one in front of Marisol. "Take a break, Mija?" Marisol smiled gratefully, sipping the tea. "I feel like I'm finally starting to move forward, Mama. It's slow, but it's something." Ines reached out, placing a hand on Marisol's. "You're doing more than something. You're building a new life, and I'm proud of you." Marisol's heart swelled at her mother's words. It wasn't just her own resilience keeping her afloat. It was the people around her, steady and unwavering. Damien's world, by contrast, continued to spiral. At work, his colleagues avoided eye contact, and the whispers in the hallways grew louder. A leaked memo about one of his failed investments had made its way to the media, tarnishing his once flawless reputation as a shrewd businessman. Even his once loyal assistants seemed to regard him with quiet disappointment. During a tense board meeting, Damien's partner Lucas didn't hold back. "Damien, your personal life is becoming a liability for this company," Lucas said, his tone sharp. "People are questioning your judgment, and frankly, I can't blame them. I can handle it, Damien replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Lucas leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Can you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like everything is falling apart. The meeting ended with no resolution, and Damien walked out feeling more isolated than ever. He had built his career on control and confidence, but both now felt like sand slipping through his fingers. At home, Clara's demands grew louder, her patience thinner. She wanted more luxury, more public displays of their relationship, more reassurance that she hadn't backed the wrong horse. But Damien had nothing left to give. Their arguments became routine, each one eroding the veneer of their relationship. One night, after an especially vicious fight, Clara packed a bag and left. Figure out what you want, Damien, she said as she walked out the door. Because I'm not sticking around for this mess. Damien didn't try to stop her. Instead, he sat in the empty apartment, staring at the remnants of a life he no longer recognized. The silence was deafening, his thoughts a relentless echo of regret and guilt. I left everything for this. Meanwhile, Marisol's quiet determination began to yield results. She secured a part-time position at a local community center, organizing events and running programs for families. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was fulfilling, and it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. Mateo continued to be a steady presence, his encouragement a constant source of strength. One afternoon, as they walked through the park with the twins, he turned to her. You're doing amazing, you know that? He said, his voice warm. Marisol smiled. I don't know about amazing, but I'm trying. Mateo stopped, looking at her intently. You're more than trying. You're rebuilding, and it's incredible to see. Marisol felt a blush rise to her cheeks, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Back in his empty apartment, Damien picked up his phone and stared at Marisol's contact. He had typed out a dozen messages but deleted each one, unable to find the words. Finally, he pressed call, his heart pounding. Hello? Marisol's voice was cautious but calm. Marisol, it's me, Damien said, his voice cracking. I don't know what to say, but I needed to hear your voice. There was a long silence, and Damien felt his chest tighten. When Marisol finally spoke, her tone was steady. What do you want, Damien? I don't know, he admitted. I miss them. I miss you. Marisol's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stay composed. You made your choice, Damien. And now I'm making mine. The call ended, leaving Damien in the silence he had created for himself. The late afternoon sun filtered through Marisol's kitchen window, casting a golden glow on the cluttered table. Amid the usual chaos of baby bottles and paperwork lay an old wooden box that Ines had hesitantly handed her earlier that day. This belonged to your father, Ines had said, her voice tinged with unease. I've kept it all these years, but maybe it's time you had it? Marisol sat staring at the box now, her heart heavy with anticipation. The hinges creaked as she lifted the lid, revealing a neatly arranged collection of papers, photographs, and a small leather-bound ledger. She picked up the ledger, her fingers brushing over the worn cover, and opened it to the first page. Her breath caught in her throat as she scanned the entries. It wasn't just an ordinary account book. It detailed transactions, loans, and payments, many of which were tied to Damien's family. Names she recognized, including Damien's father and uncle, were scrawled in her father's handwriting alongside large sums of money. What is this? She whispered to herself, her pulse quickening. The further she read, the clearer it became. Her father had been involved in shady dealings with Damien's family, a web of favors and financial manipulations that stretched back decades. Her mind reeled. Papa was an honest man, wasn't he? He loved us. He wouldn't have. But the evidence before her told a different story. These weren't the actions of a man without secrets. Later that evening, Mateo arrived, sensing the tension as soon as he walked in. Marisol wordlessly handed him the ledger, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to shock. This is unbelievable, Mateo said, flipping through the pages. Your father and Damien's family, this goes way deeper than just Damien walking out on you? Marisol nodded, her voice trembling. I feel like my whole life was built on lies. Papa always talked about integrity, about doing what's right, and now this. How could he have been part of something so corrupt? Mateo placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Maybe there's more to the story. This doesn't mean he was a bad man, Marisol. He might have been caught up in something he couldn't escape. But why didn't Mama tell me? She asked, her voice breaking. Did she know? Mateo hesitated. I think you need to talk to her. If anyone has answers, it's your mom. Marisol waited until the twins were asleep before confronting Ines. Her mother sat at the edge of the couch, wringing her hands as Marisol laid the ledger on the coffee table. "Mama," Marisol began, her tone firm but tinged with pain. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Inés's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the ledger. "I was trying to protect you, Mija. Your father, he made mistakes, but he wasn't a bad man." "Mistakes?" Marisol echoed, her voice rising. "This isn't just a mistake, Mama. He was working with Damien's family and it wasn't honest work." Inés looked away, her face etched with guilt. "He owed them money, Marisol. A lot of money. When you were little, we were struggling just to keep food on the table. Damien's father offered to help, but the price was high." Marisol sank into a chair, her head spinning. "So Papa got caught up in their schemes because he didn't have a choice?" Inés nodded. "He wanted to get out, but by then it was too late. He was trapped. And when he died," her voice faltered, "I kept this from you because I didn't want you to carry his burden. I thought if I buried it, it would stay buried." Marisol felt a mix of anger and pity. Her father's legacy was more complicated than she had ever imagined, and her mother's silence had only deepened the betrayal. But as she looked at Inés, she also saw the weight of years of sacrifice and pain. "I needed to know, Mama," she said softly. "I deserved to know." The revelations didn't stop with the ledger. As Marisol dug deeper, using the names and connections listed in her father's notes, she uncovered more about Damien's family. They weren't just participants in shady dealings, they had built their wealth on a foundation of exploitation and deceit. And Damien, whether willingly or through ignorance, had carried on their legacy. Marisol's anger burned brighter with each new discovery. Damien's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was part of a larger pattern, one that had hurt not only her family but countless others. She realized she couldn't stay silent. She had to act. One evening, Mateo found Marisol hunched over her laptop, documents spread across the table. "What are you working on?" he asked. "I'm compiling everything," she said, her tone determined. "The ledger, the transactions, the connections to Damien's family. People need to know the truth." Mateo frowned. "Are you sure about this? Going public could have consequences. For you, for the twins?" Marisol met his gaze, her eyes blazing. "I can't keep quiet, Mateo. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about breaking the cycle. Damien's family has gotten away with this for too long." Mateo nodded, respect and admiration in his eyes. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Meanwhile, Damien's world continued to crumble. News of his family's past dealings began to surface, leaked to the media in pieces that painted an increasingly damning picture. His colleagues distanced themselves, his friends disappeared, and even Clara, who had briefly returned, walked out for good when the financial strain became too much. Damien knew Marisol was behind the leaks. Her tenacity was unmistakable. But instead of anger, he felt a deep, gnawing shame. She was doing what he should have done, exposing the truth no matter the cost. As Marisol prepared to release her findings publicly, she stood before her twins' crib, watching them sleep. Emilia stirred, her tiny hand reaching for Gabriel, who lay peacefully beside her. They were her reason for everything, for fighting, for uncovering the truth, for breaking the cycle of deceit. She leaned down and kissed them both. "This is for you," she whispered. "For a better future." The grand dining hall of the Moreno estate, once a place of Damien's family gatherings filled with laughter and opulence, now carried an air of foreboding. Marisol stood at the far end of the table, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. Her heart pounded, but her determination burned brighter. Across from her, Damien sat stiffly, flanked by his mother, Teresa, and Uncle Hector. The rest of the family filled the seats, their whispers a low hum of speculation. "What is this about?" Teresa snapped, her tone sharp and defensive. "If this is some kind of stunt, Marisol." "This isn't a stunt," Marisol interrupted, her voice steady and clear. "This is about truth. About breaking the silence that has protected your family for too long." Damien shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw tightening. "Marisol, if this is about the kids." "This isn't just about the kids," she shot back, her eyes blazing. "This is about everything your family has done to mine. To countless others." She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of documents, placing them on the table with deliberate force. "These," she said, her voice ringing out, "are records of every dirty deal, every manipulation, every lie your family has used to build their empire." Gasps rippled through the room as the family members leaned forward, their faces pale. Damien's uncle, Hector, grabbed the papers, flipping through them with shaking hands. "Where did you get these?" he demanded, his voice rising. That doesn't matter, Marisol replied coldly. What matters is what they show: illegal transactions, fraudulent accounts, and schemes that ruin lives, including my father's. Teresa's face turned white and she leaned back in her chair, her carefully composed mask beginning to crack. You don't understand? Oh, I understand perfectly, Marisol interrupted. I understand that your so-called legacy is built on exploitation and greed. I understand that my father was dragged into your games and couldn't escape. And I understand that Damien, she turned to him, her voice sharp as a blade, has been complicit in all of it. Damien's head shot up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. I didn't know, he said weakly. I didn't? Don't you dare lie to me, Marisol snapped. You knew enough. You knew about the deals, the debt, the way your family crushed anyone who got in their way. And instead of stopping it, you continued the cycle. The room fell into tense silence as Damien stared at her, his face a mix of guilt and disbelief. For the first time, he saw the depth of Marisol's pain, the strength behind her words and the fire in her eyes. She was no longer the woman he had left behind. She was someone he barely recognized, someone he deeply respected and feared. As the confrontation continued, the doors to the dining hall burst open, and Clara strode in, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Her presence, as always, demanded attention, but this time, it was unwelcome. Am I late to the show? She drawled, her lips curving into a sly smile. Marisol's gaze narrowed. Perfect timing. Maybe you'd like to explain your role in all of this? Clara arched an eyebrow, feigning innocence. I have no idea what you're talking about. Marisol didn't flinch. Don't play coy, Clara. You were involved in Damien's failed investments, you pushed him further into debt and you profited from it. You've manipulated him just as much as this family has manipulated others. Damien's eyes darted between Clara and Marisol, realization dawning on him. Is that true? He demanded, his voice low and strained. Clara's smirk faltered. Oh, come on, Damien. Don't act surprised. You knew what you were getting into, did I? Damien's voice rose, his anger finally breaking through. I thought we were building a life together. But it was all a game to you, wasn't it? Clara shrugged, her nonchalance a sharp contrast to the tension in the room. You were useful. That's all. The words hit Damien like a punch to the gut. For so long he had justified his actions, telling himself that Clara was his escape, his fresh start. But now as he looked at her, he saw the truth: she had used him just as he had used others. Marisol stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. This ends today, she said, her tone unyielding. No more lies, no more manipulation. I've already shared these documents with the authorities. The truth is coming out whether you like it or not. Teresa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You think you can bring us down? She hissed. We've survived worse than this. Maybe you have, Marisol said, her gaze piercing. But not anymore. People deserve to know the truth, and I'll make sure they do. Damien sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. The weight of his choices, his complicity, and his failure to act crushed him. He thought about the children he had yet to meet, the life he had thrown away, and the woman he had underestimated. For the first time he realized how far he had fallen, and how much he had lost. As the meeting ended, Marisol walked out of the estate with her head held high. Mateo was waiting for her by the car, his expression a mix of pride and concern. How did it go? He asked. Marisol took a deep breath, her resolve unshaken. It's done. They know it's over. Mateo nodded, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. You're incredible, Marisol. You know that. She offered a small, tired smile. I don't feel incredible. I feel free. As they drove away, Marisol glanced back at the estate one last time. It no longer felt like a place of power, it felt like a relic of a broken past. And as the road stretched out before her, she focused on what lay ahead, a future built on truth, resilience, and the love of her children. The early morning sun streamed through the apartment windows, casting a warm glow over Marisol's modest but inviting living space. Toys were scattered across the floor, the cheerful clutter of life with twins, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Emilia and Gabriel, now 4 months old, babbled in their playpen, their infectious laughter making the small apartment feel like a sanctuary. Marisol sat at the kitchen table, reviewing her work schedule for the week. Her new job at the community center had become a cornerstone of her routine, offering not only financial stability but also a sense of purpose. Every day she met people who reminded her of her own journey, mothers finding strength after hardship, families rebuilding from nothing. She had become more than a participant. she was a guide helping others find their footing just as she had found hers. Matteo arrived as he often did, balancing a bag of groceries and a wide grin. "Morning, Supermom," he teased, setting the bag on the counter. "I brought you some of that fancy coffee you like." Marisol laughed, shaking her head. "You're spoiling me, Matteo." "Someone has to," he replied, his tone light but his eyes sincere. Matteo had become a constant presence in her life, his support unwavering. He was there for the long nights, the early mornings, and the moments when doubt threatened to creep in. His friendship had been a lifeline, and though Marisol didn't know what the future held for them, she was grateful for him in the present. Damien, meanwhile, found himself navigating a much darker path. His family's reputation lay in ruins, their secrets exposed to the public. Businesses he had once managed with confidence now turned him away, unwilling to risk association with his tarnished name. Clara was gone, her parting words a cruel reminder of how deeply he had been deceived. Alone in his empty apartment, Damien finally faced the consequences of his choices. He had spent months justifying his actions, blaming others and running from the truth. But now, with nothing left to distract him, the weight of his guilt was inescapable. The only glimmer of hope he clung to was Marisol. Though he had no right to ask for forgiveness, he felt an overwhelming need to try. She was the one person who had seen through his facade, who had once believed in him. And if he could make amends with her, perhaps he could begin to rebuild some semblance of a life. One evening, as Marisol was putting the twins to bed, her phone buzzed. The screen displayed Damien's name, and for a moment she considered ignoring it. But something compelled her to answer. "Marisol," Damien's voice came through, hesitant and raw. I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to talk to you." She exhaled slowly, leaning against the nursery door. "What do you want, Damien?" "I want to apologize," he said, his voice breaking. "For everything. For leaving you, for betraying your trust, for being everything you didn't deserve." Marisol closed her eyes, the familiar ache resurfacing. "Do you think an apology can undo what you did? Do you think it changes anything?" "No," Damien admitted. "I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. And I want to see the twins. I want to be in their lives if you'll let me." Her grip on the phone tightened. The thought of letting Damien back into her world was both terrifying and infuriating. But as she looked at Amelia and Gabriel, peacefully asleep in their cribs, she felt the stirrings of something unexpected: compassion. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice firm but measured. "But don't think for a second that this is about you. It's about them." "I understand," Damien said, his relief evident. "Thank you, Marisol. I'll wait for your decision." In the weeks that followed, Marisol wrestled with her emotions. Forgiving Damien felt impossible, yet she couldn't ignore the possibility that his presence might benefit the twins. She confided in Matteo, who listened patiently as she voiced her doubts. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," Matteo said gently. "And it doesn't mean you have to let him back into your life completely. But maybe it's about giving the twins a chance to know their father." Marisol nodded, though the decision still weighed heavily on her. She didn't trust Damien, not yet, but she knew she had to prioritize her children's future over her own pain. Their first meeting was cautious and awkward. Marisol agreed to let Damien visit the twins at the community center, where she felt safe and in control. Damien arrived looking tired and unsure, but his eyes softened when he saw Amelia and Gabriel. He approached slowly, kneeling beside the playpen. "Hi," he said softly, his voice trembling. "I'm your dad." The twins stared at him with wide, curious eyes, and Damien's face crumbled. He looked up at Marisol, tears streaming down his cheeks. "They're beautiful. You've done so well, Marisol." She didn't reply, her emotions a tangle of anger, pride, and cautious hope. The moment wasn't about her, it was about the twins. And for their sake, she allowed Damien this small step forward. Over time, Damien's visits became more regular, though always on Marisol's terms. He showed genuine effort, slowly earning her trust, not as a partner but as a father. Though the wounds between them would never fully heal, Marisol found solace in the boundaries she set, the control she maintained over her life and her children's future. As the months passed, Marisol's life continued to blossom. The community center grew under her leadership, and she began exploring the possibility of starting her own nonprofit for single mothers. Matteo remained a constant presence, his quiet support evolving into something deeper, a bond that hinted at a future filled with mutual respect and love. One evening, as Marisol watched the twins crawl across the living room floor, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Her journey had been fraught with pain and struggle, but from the ashes of her old life, she had built something strong, something beautiful. Marisol picked up Emilia and Gabriel, holding them close. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, a promise to herself and to them. Better than okay. In that moment she knew the truth. She was no longer a victim of Damien's betrayal. She was a survivor, a mother, and a woman ready to embrace the new life she had forged. The soft hum of voices filled the small auditorium as women from all walks of life gathered for the first meeting of the Embrace Foundation. Marisol stood at the podium, her heart swelling with gratitude and pride. What had started as a seed of an idea, a way to help single mothers navigate the challenges she had faced, had grown into something tangible, something that could change lives. Behind her, a banner displayed the foundation's slogan, "Strength through Community." Mateo stood in the wings, holding Emilia and Gabriel, who waved their tiny hands as if cheering her on. Marisol smiled at the sight of them, their presence grounding her as she addressed the crowd. "I started this foundation because I know what it means to feel alone, to face challenges that seem insurmountable," she began, her voice steady and warm. "But I also know the strength that comes from resilience, from leaning on those who lift you up. We are here for each other, and together we can create something beautiful." The audience erupted in applause, and Marisol felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The path that had brought her here had been painful, but it had also given her purpose. Later that evening, Marisol returned home to the cozy apartment she had transformed into a haven for her family. Mateo helped her settle the twins into their cribs, his easygoing demeanor masking the quiet admiration he always carried for her. "You were amazing tonight," he said as they sat on the couch, the twins finally asleep. "You're building something incredible." Marisol glanced at him, her eyes soft. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mateo. You've been my anchor through all of this." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You give me too much credit. You were always strong, Marisol. I just reminded you of it." Their eyes met, and for a moment the unspoken bond between them felt almost palpable. But before either of them could say anything more, the soft cries of Gabriel broke the moment. Marisol stood, smiling as she went to tend to her son. Meanwhile, Damien stood outside the community center, staring at the banner that bore Marisol's name. He had come to every meeting so far, sitting quietly in the back, watching her thrive in a way he had never imagined. Each visit was a reminder of what he had lost, but also of what he could learn. He knew his path to redemption was just beginning. The damage he had done couldn't be erased, but he was determined to try. With Marisol's permission, he had started spending more time with Emilia and Gabriel, each visit a chance to prove himself, not to win her back, but to be the father his children deserved. Damien had also begun volunteering at the foundation, using his business skills to help with logistics and funding. It was humbling work, far from the high-powered meetings and lavish lifestyle he had once known. But for the first time in years he felt grounded. Marisol watched Damien's efforts from a distance, her feelings complicated but resolute. Forgiveness had been a journey, one she had embarked on not for him, but for herself. She had come to realize that forgiveness wasn't about absolving him. It was about freeing herself from the chains of resentment. She had made it clear to Damien that their relationship would never be rekindled, and to her relief, he respected her boundaries. His focus remained on the twins, and while trust was slow to rebuild, Marisol appreciated his genuine efforts. One afternoon, as Damien sat on the floor of the living room playing with Emilia and Gabriel, he looked up at Marisol. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me the chance to be part of their lives." Marisol nodded, her gaze steady. "This isn't about you, Damien. It's about them. Don't forget that." "I won't," he promised, his voice filled with sincerity. In the months that followed, the foundation flourished, and Marisol found herself busier than ever. She hired a small team to help with operations, ensuring that the foundation's reach extended beyond the city. Every success story, every mother who walked through the doors with renewed hope, was a testament to the strength Marisol had found within herself. Mateo remained by her side, his presence evolving from friend to partner in every sense of the word. One evening, as they walked through the park with the twins, Mateo stopped suddenly, turning to her with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about something." Marisol raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a smile. "Should I be worried?" "No," he replied, his tone serious but warm. "I've been thinking about how much I admire you, how much I care about you, and how I want to be part of your life, not just as a friend but as something more." Marisol felt her breath catch, her heart racing. She had always valued Mateo's steady presence, but now, hearing him speak so openly, she realized just how much he had come to mean to her. "I care about you too, Mateo," she said softly. "More than I thought I could after everything." He smiled, his eyes lighting up. "Then let's see where this goes. No pressure, no rush, just us." Marisol nodded, her heart filled with hope. As time went on, Marisol's life became a testament to resilience and growth. The twins, Emilia and Gabriel, thrived under her love and care, their laughter filling the spaces that had once been silent with grief. Damien continued his path toward redemption, his humility and dedication earning him a place in their lives, if not in Marisol's heart. And Mateo, steady, kind, and endlessly supportive, became the partner Marisol had never thought she would find. One evening, as Marisol sat in the living room with her family, the twins playing on the floor, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Her journey had been marked by betrayal, pain, and loss, but it had also been defined by love, strength, and new beginnings. Holding Emilia and Gabriel close, she whispered, "We made it." The past no longer held her captive. Her future was hers to shape, and she knew it would be filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. What do you think about Marisol's choices throughout the story? Would you have made similar decisions in her position, or would you have taken a different path? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share. Your thoughts mean the world to us. Leave a comment below and let us know what resonated most with you. For more inspiring stories, subscribe to our channel.